Today I'm going to talk to you about the 9/11 attacks. Do you remember? How easy we forget to never forget. Seems to be an issue that we see all the time. People talk about, I'll never forget. We saw it a lot when the 9/11 attacks happened. And every 9/11, we seem to see people pop up. We'll never forget. Occasionally, though, I think that throughout the year, we do forget. The purpose of this lecture is to inform the uninformed and remind those who experienced the attacks about what happened that day. Some of my background, I was active in the fire service during that time. I was out collecting for the victims of the attacks, out on the corners collecting for the firefighters, police officers that were killed in the attacks. So the 9/11 attacks not only hit our country hard in 2011, it still affects us today. We're still dealing with issues from that. According to the Gale article, 9/11 attacks from 2019, on September 11, 2001, members of a terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda, hijacked 4 commercial airplanes with the intention of crashing them into prominent buildings in the United States to maximize civilian casualties as well as exposure to the attack. So during this time, it brought out a lot of good in people, and we also see a lot of bad in people. Again, people were out there giving money, they were out there donating, and then we had some issues where people just weren't bringing out the best in them. So as we know, during that day, we had several different targets. The Twin Towers were attacked. 2 planes, one hitting each of the towers, occurred that day. And then another plane went down and hit the Pentagon. The 4th plane had an unknown target. It was crashed, landed into a field. But according to the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, who wrote on September 14, 2001, that they believe the plane had been shot down because one of the engines was found a considerable distance from the crash site. And according to Ellis Davison's book on hijacking America's minds on 9/11, there are no signs of fuel contamination at the crash site. And at the same time, there's been no evidence to suggest that the planes were shot down. There's no evidence of any type of explosive or bomb materials that would have caused the plane to come down at that time. So now I'll talk a little bit about what we saw in a positive way for our people. Again, there are people out collecting money for the victims. People were going into churches, taking up collections, sending it to New York, and to offer it to the families of the victims of the 9/11 attacks. Our firefighters across the country started collecting together and traveling to New York to start looking for the bodies of the victims that were out there. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the negative effects that had here in a moment. Our country was proud at that point to stand together. We were all flying our flags proudly, and we all came in as one. No matter who you were, where you were from, our country really banded together. Now let's talk about some of the things we saw bad in people. There's a lot of, with all the collections that were going on in the country at that time, there were several people out collecting for themselves. They were saying they were collecting for the victims. They were out collecting 9/11 for 9/11, and then taking the funds and keeping them for themselves for their own purposes. Very selfish. There's been a long process to convince Congress to aid the victims in the attack. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people, we brought out a lot of good people, firefighters and police officers throughout the country, traveled to New York. They offered their assistance in helping retrieve the victims, and now not only the ones that were at ground zero during the attacks, but as well as the ones that went and helped are dealing with health issues. And finally, just recently, there's been passage of legislation that is going to fund the health care for those individuals for another 99 years, as well as their families. Some of the things that happened negatively, some people saw the attacks on Muslims and started taking it personal, that just because someone was of Muslim descent, that they were ultimately responsible in the attacks, or they had a negative opinion of America. And most recently, the Gale 9/11 attacks article discussed how Omar's speech discussed the discrimination and mistreatment against American Muslims since the 9/11 attacks, and urged Muslims to play a larger role in their civic life. She then was then criticized because of what someone wanted to turn into her saying something happened, that someone did something. That brought out more negativity. So let's review a little bit here. So on 9/11, the 9/11 attacks not only hit our country hard in 2001, it still affects us today. We're still dealing with the rash. We have people who are still suffering from what happened, and the events leading to the crashes and the various responses and aftermath is still lasting with us as we look today. So in closing, just keep remembering and remember to never forget. Thank you.